This video is a continuation of last week's video where we took our senior portrait pictures. You may have heard me say in previous videos that I do very minimal post-processing. I'm mainly into photorealism, so even with my Fuji film sims, I don't stray too far away from reality. So here's my basic post-processing routine. With my Canons and Fujis, I mainly shoot in JPEG because I find the color rendition very pleasing. With my Sonys, however, I found that you need to shoot in RAW to get the best colors out of the image. So why don't we go ahead and start with this raw photo that you see here. This is Luminar Neo, the main editing panel. Since I'm shooting in RAW, what I do is I start off with the edits on this tab, and you can see that it brought up raw edits. And I believe if you shoot in JPEG, this option doesn't show up at all. I believe you just have this tools option. So basically I just work my way down through these options in order. First window here, you can see camera profile. This one is set now to Luminar default. A lot of people may not realize this, but Sony does have picture profiles in their cameras. They're not quite as flexible or pleasing as the Fuji film sims, but they are there. I do like vivid. It's almost like a Velvia in Fuji terms. This one is pretty extreme, I think, though. And then there's a vivid 2 down here that's less extreme. And these all stand for something here. I think this is natural, black and white, fluorescent, portrait. That one I don't know, standard. This one I think is supposed to be like an instant film simulation. Since we are shooting portraits, I've chosen portrait, and you can see the color there changes a little bit. If there needs to be some exposure change, I will use this. To me, that looks pleasing enough. If you need to bring down the highlights, I will use this slider. A lot of times with my Fuji, I wind up boosting the shadows. To me, Fuji tends to be a little bit finicky with their ISOs, and so a lot of times I wind up bringing up the shadows. But I don't believe we have to do anything here. Okay. So now that we have the camera profile set to portrait, everything looks fine. I don't adjust the blacks and whites. I don't adjust the curves generally. With the cameras I use so far and the time of day I shoot also, the exposures generally I don't have problems with. The curves, I guess you could do some curve adjustment here if you want to, but generally I go to the color. The only thing I do here with the color is I do check my white balance. It was cloudy, so you could choose something like that, which I don't find very appealing. Most of the time I use as shot. I think all the cameras now do a really good job with auto white balance and auto ISO. So again, generally I don't do anything with the white balance. I may warm something up or cool something down if needed. And then when it comes to saturation and vibrance, I do use that a little bit, particularly with my Sony cameras again. I prefer using vibrance over saturation. To me, I think of it as it brings up the color that's underrepresented in the photo, whereas saturation brings all of the color up. For this particular photo, because it seems kind of low contrast with a lot of the colors blending into each other, I am going to use a little bit of vibrance here. I never go very crazy on this. I mean, honestly, a lot of times I just put it at 10. But for me, the break over point on my screen, at least, to where it looks like there's adding some color without getting too outrageous, is this 17. I know that's an odd value. I guess it could be 15 or 20 just as easily. Now we could add a touch of saturation. I think I brought it up a little bit, but then I don't like the way it brings out the skin tones. Makes it look a little orangey, which I don't like. So I'm going to keep the saturation at 0. I don't do any sharpening at this point. I also don't do any noise reduction. Now for the optics, because I am shooting RAW, I check all of these and I just leave it at automatic. The only other thing that I do on the RAW panel is this noiseless, and it will go ahead and tell you how much noise reduction it needs. So I'm using low. Sometimes there will be no recommendation at all, like you don't need noiseless at all. There are other tools that are available on the Tools tab now that we've made all of our RAW file adjustments. The one thing I always do is crop. I don't like when the horizon's not level. Shooting in Hawaii, a lot of times you can tell when it's not level because we're at sea level. But this is just a little bit off, and I'm looking at the background here, and I believe it's like just a hair off of horizontal. There you go. I'm going to apply that. You can make other crop adjustments just like in other tools. I'm keeping the original ratio here. You could, for instance, change it from a vertical to a horizontal, and then you can use all the different ratios, including just freestyling. But because I am going to print this out on a 2:3 ratio poster, I'm not going to make any changes in the crop ratio. I want to make sure that what I see on the screen is going to be printed on the poster. You could do some other adjustments if you needed to flip it. If there's some skewness based on, you know, horizontal or vertical, you could also do that here. One of the things that Luminar Neo is famous for is just being able to use this enhance slider. If you wanted to, I mean, some people just go straight this tab and then just use the accent here. Here, we'll do it just for, you know, you could do something like that. So if you don't want to do any of whatever I did except for the cropping can't be done automatically. You could just use the accent here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a sky enhance just to add a little bit of color into the sky. I think I decided on, you know, again, I don't know why I chose 52. I could very easily be 50, 55, whatever. If you're feeling adventurous though and like to do a sky replacement, you very easily can do a sky replacement using the sky option here. You can open this up and just very quickly you can do a very sophisticated sky replacement if you want to. Otherwise, Luminar Neo makes it very easy to do this. The first step really is just selecting your sky. There's many options for doing this. I'd say if you're going to use a sky replacement though, use something that's realistic. For instance, we see here how the clouds are. So something like this probably would not be very realistic since these are the puffier, fluffier clouds. So maybe something like this might be more appropriate. In fact, I really like that actually. Another caution with when you do sky replacements, you want to have the appropriate amount of bokeh. So you don't want it to be kind of bokeh-licious up front and then suddenly in the back you see these very sharp clouds. The other thing is you want to match the warmth. For instance, in this picture, again, we're approaching blue hour. And so the temperature of the clouds in the sky here, that looks about right for a blue hour photo. So that also makes it realistic. The other thing that can throw off is the exposure. This guy fits perfectly there, but if it was something different, so for instance closer to, you know, golden hour, maybe something like this wouldn't work exposure wise, so you would want to adjust the exposure. And finally, you do have some laterality in adjusting like the horizontal, vertical position, etc. So you just want to make sure that lines up. So again, if you're having these big puffy clouds, you wouldn't necessarily want them to be, you know, closer to ground level, which would be unrealistic. But you do have some laterality again in kind of positioning these clouds. And so here you can see that I am adjusting the horizontal position. You can actually see it's creeping into the shadows there in the water. And then here using the vertical position slider, you could even flip it if for some reason you'd like to have it there. And there's all kinds of other things you can do here. You know, you can do some relighting. So, you know, whether you want more of the foreground lit versus the background, or like reflection. So we are in front of a body of water here, so you could adjust some of the reflection if you wanted to. Yeah, and then this is here where you would adjust the bokeh. You can add some haze if you're, you know, happen to be, you know, in a forest, early morning, etc. You can add some haze to it as well. So you can use all these sliders here to make your sky more realistic. But for our purposes, we were just, as you saw, we just put it to 52. That's going to show up here in the edit panel. So that is one thing about Luminar Neo. Once I made that adjustment, you saw the tool went back to 0, but you can see the adjustment that was made here under the edits. And this is showing sequentially the changes that we're making here. I use super sharp. Super sharp is for those instances maybe where your hand moved a little bit or the subject moved a little bit. So what it tries to do is bring that into focus. I generally use low if I think, you know, there might be some chance that there's some shake. And honestly, if there isn't, I think it doesn't hurt to apply a little bit of super sharp. I will tell you this though, don't use face enhance. I use that for a whole series of candids that I took during graduation, and it makes the face look really rubbery. So I definitely wouldn't use face enhance. Okay, so we're working our way down here. Again, here there is another develop tab. We've already used the develop because we had an opportunity to do that with the raw options. So that's the same tool. Okay, and then we use the enhance slider up there. This is one of Luminar Neo's strengths here, is object erase. This is AI driven. So we're just gonna erase these folks back here so that we have a clean background. There you go. And you can see Luminar Neo does a really good job with this. Now, if you had dust spots, let's say that your sensor had some dust on it, or let's say you scanned a photo in and there were dust specks on there, you could use that. Now, there is a whole section here for landscape. So you have a bunch of options here. Again, you could replace the sky. You could do God rays. You can add those kind of manually. Atmosphere, you can add fog. I think you can add, yeah, layered fog, haze, and mist. For landscape, I do sometimes use dehaze. So I found that to be pretty helpful. The golden hour, that simulates, here, let's go ahead and do that. That kind of simulates that gold color that you get during golden hour. Actually, that doesn't look bad. Let's keep that. And foliage enhance brings out the greens, kind of the greens and yellows here. And then maybe we can see that on the trees back there if we, yeah. So I'll just exaggerate a little bit for you to see there. But that brings out the green and yellow. Let me skip down to what I do use on the portraits section. On face, sometimes if the face is underexposed, let's say it's a group shot, I do use face light, you know, to bring out some faces if needed. I don't really alter people's appearance, so I don't use these other things like the eyes and the mouth. The one thing that I do use is skin. This blemish removal tool is amazing. This is probably one of my favorite things on Luminar Neo. You can crank this up. I think on this photo I used 80. The photographs actually from Ho'omalahia do a better job of showing off the blemish removal tool, so I'm going to go ahead and insert those pictures here. Also, it just happened to be a beautiful time of day. The sun was just coming up. This is around 7:30, 8:30 in the mornings. The sun was just coming up over the horizon and shining perfectly on this little spot where we were taking pictures. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and you can see how the blemish removal has smoothened out the face without removing all the texture, so it doesn't look all rubbery. I'm not going to zoom in. I'm not a pixel peeper, and I think, you know, if you zoom in at 1000%, even a person with perfect skin, you're going to just start seeing their pores and everything. So that is with him facing into the sun. To me, the skin looks very smooth and natural and still has a little bit of texture to it. Okay, and then this picture, he happens to be facing the other way, so you can see how the blemish removal tool handled both sides of his face. To me, that looks very smooth and natural. We were very fortunate with the sun that day that it was just shining perfectly here on this little grove where we were at. And again, you can still see some texture in the face, so I think it looks really good. It doesn't look over smoothened. So I do like that blemish removal tool. It is probably my favorite tool in that portrait section. Again, you could make some body adjustments. Again, I generally don't do that. And that's it. So that's my entire photo processing routine from start to finish. Okay, when your edits are all done, you'll want to output this. So you can go to export. Now, for the purposes of making this poster, you can use JPEG, TIFF, or PDF. I just use a JPEG, no sizing, no sharpening, use this color space. And then I bump it up to 300 pixels per inch. I don't know if that's really necessary, but I've done this in the past and I found to maintain the resolution on that size of a poster, it's helpful to have 300 pixels per inch. The quality, obviously, I'm going to put it at 100, and then you can hit save and that will export those changes. Make sure to watch the other video where we go into the logistics of ordering and printing the posters. Mahalo for watching. If you have any questions regarding editing with Luminar Neo, please post your questions in the comments and I'll be happy to answer them. Please drop a like if you enjoyed this video and make sure to subscribe for future content. Mahalo.